When I was in seminary, at least once a semester, the whole community would go out to St. Mary's Convent and Retreat Center for a quiet day. Now, these quiet days were exactly what they sound like. Days set aside for prayer and reflection for the students, faculty, and staff of the seminary. And while there were meditations and lectures from a guest speaker, the bulk of the time was unstructured, with one main rule: no talking. You had to keep quiet. No talking during community meals, no joking with your friends. Keep silence. I was never very good at quiet days. Now, while others were journaling or practicing centering prayer, I would just walk around. I started with good intentions, intending to spend the day in prayer or at least being silent but also productive, like learning my Greek alphabet. But without fail, I would end up filling the time by walking around the campus of St. Mary's. And this wasn't some profound spiritual discipline. Honestly, I had just gotten a new Fitbit, and I was trying to see how many steps over 10,000 I could get. However, while wandering around the campus, I ran into some classmates who were doing a different type of walking. In a clearing, several of them were walking in a spread out line. They were going in and around in a winding movement. They were following a path, weaving in and out and curving around, slowly making their way towards a center point. If two people encountered each other on the path, they would silently bow to each other to acknowledge one another's presence and then keep walking on. They were walking a labyrinth. And I was already walking anyway, so I figured I would turn what I was already doing into prayer. And for the first time, I learned and practiced the art of walking a labyrinth. At first glance, a labyrinth looks like a maze. But labyrinths are not mazes. You see, mazes are designed to confuse. They have wrong turns and dead ends. Mazes have few correct paths, typically only one correct path, and many incorrect ones. Mazes are meant to be solved, completed, and then left behind. But not labyrinths. Labyrinths have one path. The path is not simple and it's not straightforward. It curves and doubles backs, but there are no wrong turns in a labyrinth. You don't get lost in a labyrinth, though it can feel like you are at times. Sometimes you think you're getting close to the center, and then suddenly the path carries you back out towards the edge again. It feels inefficient because it is. Labyrinths don't make too much sense by the world's logic. But the point isn't to get to the center quickly. The point is to walk with trust. You see, labyrinths are spiritual tools like icons or rosaries. They're a place to intentionally walk with God in prayer. And in a lot of ways, parables are like labyrinths. It's one of the reasons why Jesus uses parables to teach about God rather than a straightforward lecture. Labyrinths aren't mazes, and parables aren't puzzles. Parables are not riddles to be solved. They're not fables with tidy moral lessons at the end. They're more like labyrinths. Parables are stories that draw us in, make us turn and double back, ask questions, listen again. They are spiritual tools, not the answer key in the back of the textbook. They are meant to be entered into and encountered and experienced. Which brings us to today's gospel reading, one of the most well-trodden and beloved parables of all, the parable of the prodigal son. It's one of the most familiar stories that Jesus ever told. This parable is so familiar that it's tempting to think that we already know what that story means, that we do have it all figured out. The father is God. The young son is a sinner who strays. The older son is the bitter one, but righteous, the one that never left. And the lesson is that God's love and forgiveness are big enough for all. Grace overflowing. And that is a good and faithful interpretation. But it's just the beginning. Because when you walk this parable like a labyrinth, it begins to unfold in new ways. Yes, the younger son is lost, but take a few more turns and you reach the older son, the faithful one, the responsible one, the one who never left. He's done everything right. And now he's standing outside the house, hearing the music and dancing from the celebration, refusing to go in. He's mad that no one ever threw a party for him, resentful that no one ever sees him. The older son is just as lost. The pigsty and resentment, well, they're both kinds of exile. And walking this parable doesn't stop with the sons. I remember last year when Deacon Joanna was leading a class in our Sunday forum on Dr. Amy Jo Levine's work on the parables. Levine commented that the father had time to call a band, to hire a caterer, to get all this big celebration organized, invite other people to come. But he didn't find the time to tell the older son about the party. And once again, the parable turns. Often we hastily assume that the father is the stand-in for God in the parable. And in some ways, maybe he is. And maybe not. From some perspectives, the father is just another human being with shortcomings, like the sons, like us, trying his best, lost in his own way, giving too much attention to the child who demands it and not enough to the one who carries quiet burdens. It seems the family dynamics of a parent with limited time and energy, torn between a problem child and a perfect child, well, that's nothing new. And where is the mother? It turns again. The parable takes on new meaning if we consider it from the perspective of a grieving family. I've learned enough about grief to know that throwing yourself into work like the older son, or escaping like the younger, or trying to hold and patch over a dysfunctional family system like the father, well, those are all well-trodden paths on the road of grief. You see what I mean about parables being like labyrinths? It looks simple at first, but takes you in directions you never anticipated. And that's what makes this parable so powerful. Depending on when we read it, we might see ourselves with the younger son, or the older one, the father, or somewhere else entirely in it. This parable, told by Jesus 2,000 years ago, holds within it the complexity of human relationships, family systems, grief, resentment, and love. And every time we return to it, it teaches us something new, not because it changes, but because we do. We grow and keep walking the path of the labyrinth of our lives. And throughout our lives, we hear the parable from different spots along the way. Wherever we are on the path, whether we're nearing the center or feel like we're being pulled back to the edge, God is with us, right there in the wandering. God is with the son in the pigsty. God is with the older son in his lonely work. God is with the father in his anxious waiting. God is with them in their anger and their forgiveness, in their isolation and their celebration. And God is with us too. The parable doesn't end with a happily ever after. It doesn't end at all, it just stops. We don't know if the older son ever went to the party, or if there was reconciliation, celebration. We don't know what happens the next day or the day after that. And maybe that's the point, because our stories aren't finished yet either. We're still walking. We're still turning. We're still seeking the center of the labyrinths of our lives. So wherever you are today, whether you feel wayward and lost, faithful but unseen, overwhelmed by grief, trying to hold everything together, or maybe you're in a season of celebration. Wherever you are, know this: you are not alone. You're not on the wrong path. You can't be on the wrong path in the labyrinth. The labyrinth is only made of one path. The walk you're on, with all its twists and turns, is holy ground. This Lent, I invite us to notice the labyrinths of our lives, to find ourselves in God's story, and to keep walking, remembering that God walks with us. Amen.